everybody! Today I'm going to be showing you how to shorten the legs of a stool. So let's get into it.
Here's what the stool looked like before I started working on it. I started by measuring the amount I needed to remove from the legs. It's best to do this on a level, flat, and steady surface. I used the table saw for this. Then I started measuring 2 pieces of wood that I'll be using to make a jig. There are ways to do this without a jig, but I prefer this method because it keeps things steady and provides a guide for the cut. I measure the wood as an extra precaution, so that I can watch it and make sure the wood doesn't shift while I'm using the table saw, since this project needs to be very accurate to avoid ending up with a wobbly chair. I also use the guide on the table saw, but as my dad always says, measure twice, cut once. If I could go back, I would have sent these boards through the planer first. They're a bit bowed in the center, and that made it a bit trickier to line the saw blade up. It didn't affect the outcome, but it would have made the process a bit easier. I set the guide bar to the amount I want to remove from the jig to get the height I need, because cutting the smaller amount keeps my fingers farther from the blade. Always make sure you have your safety equipment on before you get started. After that, we cut the boards. I take care to follow the guide, and also make sure to be aware of where my hands are in relation to the saw blade. I carefully clear the scrap, and repeat the process with the second board. Take the boards we just cut and place them to either side of the stool legs. Next, it's time to grab a small block of scrap wood, about the same width and height as the 2 boards when they're laid to either side of the stool legs. Then we can attach it to make a jig. I was on a tight deadline for this project, and to save time, I tried to get away with not pre-drilling, thinking I didn't mind if the jig split slightly. But in the end, I just had to laugh, and then ended up pre-drilling anyways. I've heard the term go slow to go fast, and I feel like it applies here as well as to many other areas of life. So I finish off pre-drilling, then I add some screws to hold it all together. Once it's secure, I bring in the other board to act as the other side of the jig. I also use a small clamp to hold it steady while I'm working. Once it's all finished, the end result should look something like this. And it should line up with the height you would like to cut the legs to. I'm happy with that. So I move on to cutting the legs. This type of saw is called a double-edged pull saw or a Ryuba saw. I've never used this type of saw before, so it takes a bit of getting used to. Stabilizing the work keeps the blade from binding, so I wish I'd taken the time to secure the stool with clamps or braced it against something. This type of saw is a pull stroke saw. Pulling keeps the blade straight, which means it can be made of thinner metal. The thin blade cuts through less material, making it less effort to use. It also gives a more precise cut, both because of the thin blade and because you can guide it with your hand. Here I'm just clamping the leg back into place while I keep working away at the other legs. This type of saw was a good choice for this job. Stool legs are often detailed, rounded, or splayed, which makes using power tools difficult. After cutting this next leg, I leave a tiny bit of wood holding the leg in place. I'll cut this later. I could also use a clamp to hold it again, but I wanted to show both methods. Then we just simply repeat the process for the other legs. To make it easier, I get somebody to help me while I cut through the rest of the legs. Then I clean up any rough edges and make sure the surface is smooth. Then we need to test to make sure it's stable. Any wobble can be corrected by sanding or sawing off a small amount of wood. It's also good to chamfer the edges, rounding them to prevent any splitting. This can happen with a straight edge over time as the stool slides along the floor. Then we can glue on some pads for a smooth glide and to protect the floor. I used extra strong hot glue, but any type of strong adhesive should do the trick. I used square pads for this project because the legs are square, but round varieties are readily available. Knee pads are self-adhesive, but I cut the sticky part off, trusting a strong glue to have more lasting power, rather than falling off as the stool slides over the ground over time. Once I'm done adding the pads, I start staining the wood around the pad to match the rest of the stool. I did this after so the wet stain wouldn't interfere with the adhesive. I also spent some time touching up any scratches in the finish of the wood. I thought this was a nice touch since I had a matching stain out already. I always like to leave a piece looking better than it was when I started, even if that's not the original job. People normally appreciate the attention to detail. The exception to this would be in sentimental or antique pieces where there is value in the original condition of the piece. I prefer to leave that to specialists in antique restoration. I really like this part of the process. It's fun to find a color match, and the detail work and seeing the difference in the look is always very satisfying. With that, the project's done. I'm really happy with how this turned out. And so is the client, and that's what's most important. Thanks for watching. Bye!